Yeah.
Okay.
Just give me a second, Lopa, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Okay, shall we get started?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this event webinar titled Cinema as a Learning Tool in Higher Education, which is being organized by the Center for Teaching and Learning at IIM Bangalore. We have a very distinguished panel today. We have Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, who is a child psychiatrist with over 35 years of experience in the field of child mental health. As a former senior professor in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at NIMHANS, his work has extended beyond clinical population to children and childcare institutions across the country, as well as in the South Asia region. Dr. Seshadri's engagement with films as teaching, learning, training, and a therapeutic tool has been very long. He has extensively worked with many documentary filmmakers and provided them support in building storyboards, planning rough cuts, and has also done impact assessment of films. Dr. Seshadri, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Our other panel member is Professor, my colleague and good friend and mentor, Professor S. Raghunath of the strategy area at IIM Bangalore. Professor Raghunath, of course, is a very distinguished career at IMB. He offers a general management program for film producers, directors, film distributors, and general managers of media and entertainment companies. Professor Raghunath, of course, is is on the board of several high-tech companies, a well-loved teacher, highly respected academic. Thank you, Professor Raghunath, for taking the time to be with us today. The moderator will be Ms. Lopamutra Devan, who is the head of our Center for Teaching and Learning and a celebrity in her own right. So thanks, Lopa. And without further ado, I will hand over the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Chetan. A very good evening and namaste, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and choosing to be with us this evening. I'm extremely thrilled and happy about the fact that I am sharing the screen space with Professor Raghunath, Professor Seshadri, and Professor Chetan. Professor Chetan is the CTL chair and also the Dean Faculty of IIM Bangalore. He's also a professor here, Professor of Economics. I will take a few minutes to basically set the context and to also tell you about the format of today's discussion before I pass the baton to our speakers. So what comes to our mind when we think about cinema? So when we think about cinema, and it is a very general perception, when we think about cinema, films, or even motion pictures in general, we tend to perceive and accept that these are essentially the sources of entertainment. And many of us would also say that this is a very traditional way of looking at them. And so for educational and teaching learning purposes, when we integrate cinema into the mainstream educational practices, what I mentioned just now is definitely not forgotten. We can't deny the fact that learners do enjoy learning through films or through the things that are slightly entertaining. Another important purpose for which cinema is used in educational spaces is also to allow our learners experience or witness deeper learning through reflection and discussions a lot of times. And this trend, is just growing because we want to create engaging classrooms. But it's not that simple that we just show or include some films or movies in the curriculum and automatically our students or learners start thinking and reflecting and learning from them. So what makes us believe that films have the potential to sort of ignite thinking? And why is cinema considered one of the most powerful visual and multimedia resources? Also, what are the things that educators need to keep in mind to get the best out of this teaching learning tool, cinema? And especially in higher educational spaces where you work with and for the adult learners who have access, access to diverse or plethora of audiovisual resources, information for that matter. They have their own opinion, preferences, way of thinking, etc. So our speakers are definitely going to throw light on these and many other areas. Now, a little about the format of today's discussion. Both the speakers will take about, they will first present the opening statements, and then they will take about precisely about 5 to 10 minutes for that, because they really want to start answering and addressing the questions we have received so far and are going to receive during the session, because they really want to make you all feel engaged, involved, and also, have a sense of connection with them. Yeah, hope you all realize that. So please use the chat window to post your questions. And also, if you feel like sharing, constructive thoughts and comments. We would be slightly selective here. We would pick and select only the relevant ones from the chat window. And we may even combine the questions that are of similar nature. All right. So now over to the speakers. I would invite Professor Raghunath to first make his opening statement. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for organizing this, Professor Chetan and Ms. Lopamudra and Dr. Seshadri, who has done tremendous work in this area, devoted, I think, a substantial amount of his academic and intellectual space in this arena. And I'm ever grateful to all of you to invite me into this forum. As a teacher, I've always asked a question: how does one engage students? It is not about delivering a certain content. It is not about explaining a certain concept. It is not about being as I would say affirmative in one's orientation towards learning objectives as to get the students or those who are in the audience in the form of learners to actually feel the breeze or the wind. By that I mean that if you want, I mean, that's been my experience, that if cinema or movie clips have ever got into any teaching, it was primarily to get the core of students' thinking and feeling into a theme of discussion and exploration. So if you ask me, what is the contribution that cinema or movie clips make? It is about engaging students at greater depth. Now, all of this comes with huge costs for the teacher. By that I mean that while we are very conversant with printed matter, reading, learning, reflecting as a mode of learning, to take something which is contextually live in a visual form changes the very mode of learning. In other words, it actually gets the learner to ask questions that emerge out of being affected by what is visual there, which is followed with a lot of auditory stuff, right? Like we speak, a movie clip speaks. And expectations and dilemmas arise when you have an exposition in a movie form. So if you ask me, why is this a device which can be employed? It is primarily to provide a very in-depth engagement a narrative model that is deeply entrenched in the arena of what is familiar, moving towards what is unfamiliar. So all of us know as teachers, I'm sure there are plenty of us here in this particular webinar. If we really want to evoke imagery, that people must be able to put themselves in that context, use a certain concept, try a certain technique. They must be able to, in a sense, get into that very context of question. So this experience per se helps to clarify perspectives. It means that the teacher has to be prepared for a very deep engagement and not a perfunctory engagement which only is one-sided. What by that I mean that when you deliver a certain concept in a lecture format, of course there are questions relating to what you say, but they really don't get into the depth of questioning, understanding, and trying to bring up the kind of doubts and the kind of incomplete analysis that they have brought up for themselves relating to the theme in which that engagement happens. So I have always found that when clips are used, it brings emotional memory when people are trying to change their own framework of understanding. And framework understanding becomes more permanent than it was temporary before, because when people hear something, they agree and kind of they nod or they say, yeah, I get it, but it also goes away. But what a movie clip does is to etch that very deeply, because they start reflecting. And when any of us reflect on anything, however small in life, we see dimensions which we do not see before. So I would say that it really stimulates learner reflection. So if ever we want to put ourselves in a position of risking that reflection, because as teachers, we have responsibility, right? We've always got to bring a closure to everybody's thinking, questioning, understanding, partial understanding, misunderstanding, and all of that. So I would like to conclude. I would not like to take too much time in this opening statement. All I want to say is that it is a medium that requires a whole lot of time, a lot of reflection from the teacher, as well as from the learner. And if you say, what is the great outcome out of this? The outcome is sheer depth in reflection and in understanding how whatever you understand applies to certain contexts. I will stop with this, Ms. Lopamudra, and I would like Dr. Seshadri to also share his.
That was really insightful. And I have made my notes. Over to you, Professor Seshadri.
Thank you
so
very
much, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Professor Raghunath has laid a solid platform on the basis of which I would like to build. What Professor Raghunath has done is he has shared certain principles or let's say ideological basis of how cinema can work as a teaching methodology. Let me build on this, friends. When we looked at education itself, not in terms of higher education, but education in general, and we asked the question, what is the purpose of education? Even at the school level, and literacy, numeracy, livelihood, career, all that is legitimate stuff. But truly, the purpose of education should be the development of an egalitarian personhood, the development of a socially responsive and responsible citizenry, and the development of an identity imbued with aesthetic sensibility about life, nature, relationships, emotions, communication, and so on. At this point of time, when people started to really question how schools, for example, could become the center through which we really work on the notion of developing individuals as citizens, the concept of life skills, and there is a basis for this. You know, if you look at the HIV/AIDS pandemic or gender-based violence as significant social contexts that really question the purpose of education. And we moved from what was known as moral science earlier, which was very, concept-based, concepts like truth and compassion and so on, to family life education, which means the family became the locus in which a lot of stuff played out. Relationships, collaboration, communication, exploitation. And then came socially useful, productive work, which was the transformation into a social context. And then came the context of life skills education. So life skills education has decision making, problem solving, critical thinking, creative thinking. These skills operate in a certain context. So decision making in a gender context, decision making in peer pressure, decision making in career choice. And the relationship between life skills and context, the triangulation is completed by the pedagogy. And the pedagogy is powerful if it is experiential rather than didactic. And that's where the use of theater, the use of art, the use of role plays, the use of cinema, the clips that Professor Raghunath referred to become useful. And this, in the concept of the developmental psychologist Vygotsky, is what constitutes the zone of proximal development. You can tell a learner something as a concept, it has a certain value. It has even more value when you actually practice it in real life. But sometimes the location of that praxis is not available, and you can reach nearest to the truth if you use visual images and interactions which are as near the truth, even if they are on celluloid, to actually critique. Now, to develop this as a methodology in higher education, you remember when Professor Chetan referred to the work with the documentary filmmakers. What we did was we made a set of 4 films which actually look at the concept of masculinity when we were working on gender-based violence. And one of the films that we made, these were 4 filmmakers from Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. The Nepali film, for example, had nothing to do with the masculinity or gender-based violence. It was called Listen to the Wind, and it was about a 14-year-old boy who likes nature and has an unusual relationship with an 80-year-old man who's progressively going blind and wishes to see a rare flower that blooms only once in 12 years before he loses his eyesight. And he's kind of non-assertive and soft. He's bullied by a lot of guys who don't involve him in his play. They play a practical joke, on a girl, and they implicate him, and he gets caught, and he has pressure from his parents to kind of perform because he has to get a scholarship. And then one day during the game, he's asked to fetch the ball, and he spots the rare flower, and then he picks it up and rushes to the old man and give it to him. That's all the movie is about. But look at how it can generate so many themes for discussion. And this is where in pedagogy, andragogy, the intent, content, methodology, and process paradigm plays itself out. What is the intent? The intent could be to examine notions of masculinity. The intent could be to examine non-violent conflict resolution. The intent could be core subject that you're teaching. If I'm teaching, my intent is to sensitize the audience to gender, the content I may choose, and here is where the context content paradigm comes in. Gender is the context, gender violence is the content. Gender violence is the context, impact on women is the content. Impact on women is the context, where is health available is the content. So you see the interplay between context and content also makes itself amenable for using films as a powerful methodology. So intent, content, and then the method, films, watching clips, watching films, critiquing films. So in training programs, in a classroom situation, in higher education, and we're teaching a class on gender or something as complex as that, we watch the film and then we process it. What are impactful scenes or characters in the film that you saw? What are unforgettable elements of the film? What are themes that emerge to you given the fact that we are showing this film as part of this session on gender? What do you understand about masculinity? Does masculinity have to be about achievement, about competition, about aggressivity, about bullying, or can it be consistent with softer versions? Was this boy really not masculine because he liked nature? And the title of the film, Listen to the Wind, is the old man takes him to a place which is on the hills. It's a beautifully shot film. And he says, listen to the wind. What it actually means is listen to the voice of your own conscience and listen to the voice of your own sensibility and sensitivity. So what we have done, friends, is as part of Samvad, which is a national initiative that we run, and I've taken the liberty to put on chat our links. We have built a library of films about children, films for children, which we use as teaching methodologies for those who will work with children. So in some ways, it's a higher education or an andragogy paradigm. I'm also delighted to see that many of the people who've attended some of our training programs recently are actually on the session today. Just to give you an example, recently we completed a course on forensics in child mental health, particularly where childhood trauma and one form of childhood trauma, which is child sexual abuse, is concerned. Now, this is a very complex and a very sensitive topic, one that has often been characterized by the culture of denial and the conspiracy of silence. So how do we use gentle methods to actually break it? And what we did in this teaching program, both online and recently a face-to-face training that we did, was we selected 3 films. One was a documentary called Athlete A. Now, Athlete A is a documentary about the trial of Dr. Larry Nassar, who was the medical doctor in charge of the American gymnastics team. He was sentenced to some 200 years of imprisonment after he was indicted in a very scathing indictment. But Athlete A was the first athlete who came out about the kind of medical examination that he did in the name of assisting them, and how hundreds of people then came out. And the next film that we used was a film called The Tale, which is the true story of Jennifer Fox, who wrote and directed the film. Laura Dern stars in the film. It's about the grooming process in child sexual abuse. Another film that we used was called Cries from the Heart, which is the film of an autistic boy who is in a residential institution, who is abused by one of his caretakers. And he's intelligent, but he has no communication. So they use assisted communication to actually in the trial process that. So how some of these films can be used to actually do training in higher education for complex themes. following the intent, content, methodology, and processing paradigm to actually build a library, and as we do in Sambad, a library on children's issues. So we've used films like um, Salam Bombay, Stanley Ka Dabba, I Am Kalam, and so on, to really look at children's lives. Majid Majidi, for example, the Iranian filmmaker, both Colors of Paradise and Children of Heaven, simple tale of a boy and his sister who share shoes, and he wants to get into a 4-kilometer race because the third prize is a pair of shoes. Unfortunately, he comes first and he's devastated. And all the intricacies and nuances that occur in the film, that so powerful medium that following the intent, content, methodology, and process paradigm. And as in the question that has been put on chat, to which I have already addressed, films also constitute a qualitative method to actually look at content and how, for example, narratives on gender, narratives on children, narratives on conflict resolution, narratives on family life, narratives on profession are actually depicted in films, and have they changed over the decades, or to actually show a film and 40 people are watching it. What are their comments? You can take them in writing, and that constitutes data for you. So there are very many ways in which these films can be used. These are some of my opening thoughts. Over to you, Lopa.
Thank you so much, Professor. I will now, I actually have a question for Professor Raghunath. So, Professor, a lot of our participants and viewers are actually from the management education space, and strategy or strategic management is your area. They would like to know about the possibility of using cinema as a learning tool, especially in management education, in areas like, marketing, strategy, entrepreneurship, etc. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the first thing I would suggest is in each of these areas, see, I have a terrible habit of watching movies with a dual mindset. Let me explain this. One is, of course, watching the movie. Second is all the time looking at a certain scene and looking at a certain encounter as a certain context and asking the question, does any of this relate to anything that I teach and anything that I focus on? Now, this is like an obsession, okay? And the reason why I'm not proposing that, use A film or B film or C film is each of us have our own approach and perspective towards a subject matter, okay? All of us come from various belief systems, values, and obviously the objective content is the same, but the approaches are so different. So let me tell you a very recent thing which happened to me. I was with a very large group of top people who were running a medium-sized consulting firm out of a certain geography, not in India, but they came into India because the founders were Indians, and they had people from multiple countries. And their question was, how do we unite all these high IQ individuals towards the same common strategy and believe in a system of implementation which does not build internal conflict or is able to utilize internal conflict for affecting future growth positively? The thing which occurred to me, is to ask whether any of them had seen the movie 83. But obviously, a whole lot of people had not seen it. And I'm not sure if most of us who are here have even seen it. If you have, it's good news. But somebody like me saw it 3 times. And you'll say, Prof, you have nothing else to do. No, no, no. I don't see movies for seeing movies. I watch them because there is something which is coming out of them, and it kind of gets to me. Now, 83, in my sense, was almost a surrogate of the reality of this film. Nobody was giving them a chance in the competitive landscape, which is strategy is all about, right? How do you position yourself, and how do you grow, and how do you make sure that you are able to really defend what you have and then grow in areas where there is opportunity, and which kind of relates with your resources and competences. Now, the movie 83, as those of us who have seen it, is all about the 83 World Cup that India won, and India was completely the underdog. Nobody gave them a chance, even to the quarterfinals, including as if some of you have seen the movie, including the team manager who had booked tickets for return, right? And the guy who was in charge of Lords, he was saying that you Indians want, that pass to get into Lords. You really think you will reach anywhere into the Lords? I mean, the question was, Indians had not a chance. And those who have watched the movie 83 understand that there are 2 ways of looking at competition and your positioning, right? One is to say, nobody gives us a chance. We've never done anything. And that line in that movie was that if ever India had won a match, it was against East Africa, and East Africa is not a nation. It's like a joke, but that was a fact. Now, what is the second approach to this story? The second approach is that the leader believes that his mother has actually given him a diktat or a kind of an aspiration to give her a gift of coming back in pure Haryanvi, having won the World Cup. Now, this looks atrocious, right? But the second way of looking at it is, if you are down, you have nothing to lose if you underperform. So why not go all holds barred? You just go forward. There is nothing to lose. You maximize potential. You don't care a damn. And there are many other building elements there about, how the team becomes a team. It's not necessarily a team, it's a group. And there are a whole host of nuances. What I'm trying to say to you is, what Madam Lopamudra said is your question. You have to be enthused. Nobody can tell me use 83, for example. Or nobody can tell me you use a movie which has to do with Wall Street, because it really propounds arenas of finance that everybody should do. You cannot tell me. The reason is, you yourself as a teacher have to find that nugget which you can explore, which you can get your students to actually reflect upon, and you must be ready at all layers of questioning, because you're so much immersed in the content, in the analytics, and you have really devoted one hell of a time. Let me tell you, teaching theory, teaching case and theory, and teaching through a movie to clarify concepts and frameworks and analytical tools. That is one hell of a time allocation that you do, and you do it because you really would like to do it. So I would like to put it very simply that there are no formulas in this. There is a constant second flow of thinking which is running all the time when you see content, visual content, and you have to live through this. If it excites you, it will excite your students. But if you do something but what Professor Raghunath does, it won't fall. I guarantee you it will not fly. Why? Because you're not enthused. You're doing what somebody else is doing. It doesn't work like that. I mean, that's my view. I don't know if it works, but my point is it will not work generally. You have to be enthused about it.
Thank you so much, Professor. We are getting a lot of questions for you. Maybe you can have a look at them they are there in the chat window. I'll move to Professor Seshadri. Professor, there's a question on because you talked about the intent content paradigm. So there's a question on the content of cinema, especially when, used as a teaching learning tool. What type of content you think should be preferred? Fabricated, fictional, something which is unreal, or something which is really, raw and real. And this brings me to another question, which is about the type of cinema or films, that are useful for deriving learning from. Like we have documentaries, you have core educational films, and then you also have Bollywood type and commercial films. So I'm asking this because the content of the films, depend a lot on the type of film being made or produced. So what is your choice when you do your sessions and use films?
The bucket from which to choose from is huge. Remember what Professor Raghunath said. You can take clips from movie to suit that session, that content. You can watch entire films because they really suit they can be documentaries, they can be films that you yourself make. And in fact, if you look at Samvad's website, you'll see that a lot of the films that we have made are actually made by us. And they can be short films, they can be feature films, they can be documentary, they can be, docu-features, they can be clips from films. The idea is to source and curate it depending on the course that you're doing or the content of that particular session in the course. Let me give you a couple of examples. Many years ago, there was a very famous Hollywood film made called Ben-Hur. Stephen Boyd plays Messala and Charlton Heston played Judah Ben-Hur. And when Judah Ben-Hur was getting very powerful, Stephen Messala says, how do you fight an idea? And he says, you fight an idea with another idea. So one has to use the medium in some ways to subvert itself with this concern and anxiety that many parents have, for example, that there's too much of violence in films or there's too much of depiction of objectionable content. The truth is that you can't wish the media away. Even if you were to censor, there's a lot of stuff out there which, and if you look at areas like gender and sexuality, for example, it's very curious that we were actually a very emancipated and evolved race. If you look, for example, at Khajuraho and the Sun Temple in Konark, those of you who've been there, explicit sexuality, explicit. What happened to us? How did we move from being this emancipated, evolved race for the entire discourse on sexuality to get embedded in the HIV/AIDS, violence against women, child sexual abuse, and the assault paradigm? Why did this change? And people often tend to blame films to say that the whole narrative has got perverted. That so if you actually read what Foucault says about the kind of silences that actually characterize what should be an open discourse, the trouble is that parents' relationship with children is not based on a culture of conversations. It's based on the culture of instruction, expectation, control, and obedience. Whereas if you have the family watching something, whatever its content may be, but you have a sense of openness to discussion and allow children to express their confusion and address it openly, honestly, and sensitively, for children to understand that I can bring in any issue and it's okay for me to bring the issue, and my parents are comfortable in discussing it. So the whole choice of the content is suited to the larger program that you're running. In that program, you suit it for that particular session that you're running. I would like to end this by really referring to a particular film as to how we make this selection. Shyam Benegal made a film called Nishant many years ago. So there's a Zamindar family, 4 brothers: Amrish Puri, Anant Nag, Mohan Agashe, and Nasiruddin Shah. Nasiruddin Shah is married to Smita Patil, and he is the Girish Karnad is the teacher. Shabana Azmi is his wife. Pandit Satyadev Dubey is the village priest. The wife of the teacher gets abducted. She's held hostage, assaulted. Nasiruddin Shah is kind of hesitant. His wife is sympathetic. The village teacher cannot do anything. He's helpless. Pandit Satyadev Dubey, who plays the Pandit, kind of incites the village. And then finally, when mayhem takes place, people get killed. But Smita Patil, who plays the youngest brother's wife, also gets killed. Now, the point Benegal is trying to make in the movie is that when violence erupts, it does not recognize between the good and the bad. The innocent also go with it. And in the world of armed conflict, this is known as collateral damage. The innocent women and children also get killed. And this is the language of warfare. So it's a very thought-provoking film that then brings into sharp focus what violence means and what conflict resolution means, and how do we resolve it. And it sensitizes people to really examine non-violent forms of conflict resolution and the whole role of gender and patriarchy, of class and caste and patriarchy, and how these are real contexts in civil society and in the fabric of civil society. So Lopa, that's how selection, curating, pre-watching, deciding how you will use it, which part, to have a discussion point, key points for discussion, creating a debate, and then closing the loop by what have we learned today. So what did we see? What does it mean? What are the feelings involved? How were those decisions made? What do we learn from this? How will we apply it in our life going forward is the kind of paradigm we use.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And we are talking a lot about society, civil society, and the fact that educators do play an important role. We also talked about social responsibility. There is a question on society and how it impacts cinema making, and also how cinemas impact society and popular social psychology. Maybe I'll ask that in the end, towards the end. There's a question for Professor Raghunath. This is again related to the integration or use of films, especially when you are teaching a particular course or a program. So it's actually like a comment also. So is it because there are not enough educational films? Is it because of this that we don't use films in our classes? One is that. And secondly, people would really like to know how, when you use a film, a particular film in your class or as part of a particular program, how do you really assess the knowledge that the learners have acquired through those films? Because no learning cycle is again complete without assessment. Or maybe we still haven't reached that stage where we are ready to assess the knowledge that our students have acquired through films. So what is your take on that?
Right. So assessment, right? So which I think is the core of understanding of why use this. So I want to belabor a point. Sorry, I keep going back like a broken record. See, teaching per se, especially in management arenas, functional management arenas, starting all the way from marketing, finance, strategy. I mean, you look at anything and everything, HR, whatever you're looking at, operations. One is the intellectual dimension, right? So it is when you teach, it is intellectually stimulating. It's about creating an understanding, right? But all of us know that to get that intellectual comprehension requires performing arts, right? All teachers here who are very good at teaching know this. It also requires innovation and risk-taking in dealing with unanticipated student responses. So comfort with diversity in comprehension, in approaches to learning, is a meta objective when you use this. Okay, I'm trying to kind of expand this discussion. I'm saying there are various views of looking at rating oneself as a teacher and rating a learner and what he learns or she learns. My point is, if you get people to even examine what they are basing their learning on, it leads to changes in the frame or the lens through which a phenomenon is observed. It's a very deep contract, unsigned, unwritten contract. So when you say evaluation, if you have turned on a student who never speaks in your class, never gets a good grade, is not interested in learning, but all of a sudden shows that spark of questioning, which is so very non-traditional, you have really opened up and encouraged a dormant creative mind. So it's a very deep, unwritten contract with students. When you do this, and you say, I want to measure, that's what you measure. Have you turned on a non-learner into a learner? Have you turned on diversity of opinions, approaches, understanding, and telling everybody, boss, life is this. Management doesn't mean you have all the answers. Management means that you make everybody feel that they can get to the answers, whether it is in finance, whether it is in HR, whether it is in operations, whether it is to do with general management, whether it is to do with anything, marketing, whatever it is. So, sorry, I keep coming back to this, but the reason I come back to this is, when you take a printed word, everything is from left to right. That's the way you go, right? That's the way you give attention. You go this way, this way, this way, this way. And that is the way you absorb whatever you absorb. All of a sudden, when you see a clip or a movie or whatever, this is a complete holistic process. Everything is coming at you. And it overwhelms you because it is asking for synthesis when the focus is only on parts. Sorry, I'm talking in abstraction, but you have to live through this to understand that cinema actually creates encounter, intellectual and emotional encounter. It's not really firing at each other. It's getting these fellows, their guns to fire. They were all silent. The bullets were all duds. Now they are stirred up. They say, how did he say that? How does this work? Is this mere financial equation, or is that something more to do with the stakeholders? They ask deeper questions. There you got the learner going. You got education happening because they are constantly thinking, how does this apply in management education especially? Textbooks don't teach, you know that, right? What makes a good management thinker is the ability to apply. And I think that is a good measure, saying you stir these guys on, you force them to write reflective papers. You say, boss, we actually looked at the performance of the stock market.
we've got all the data, you got this movie clip going, you got, whatever you needed. Now I want you to come up with a reflective paper on what is your takeaway from this whole damn thing. It's a huge challenge, when you get people to reflect. And that, I think, is a great measurement of the depth to which a young mind will explore. They don't need to have answers, but they need to question at a greater depth to explore the linkages between what they learn. Sorry, Lopamudra, I was a pretty long in my.
That was really a very concrete takeaway. Thank you so much. Now the next question, and I think it is also going to be the last question, is actually for you both. And this question, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, is about society and cinema, and how they basically affect and basically affect each other. So we often find cinema either depicting or even portraying the popular social psychology, or sometimes even negating the popular psychology, because popular psychology can even be wrong. And our classrooms and educational institutes are actually mini societies. So there are chances of facing backlashes from the learners, and also from peer groups sometimes, especially in the higher educational spaces, if what is shown is not really in line with the accepted norms and practices, or may even cause embarrassment sometimes to some community or group of learners and peer educators. And then sometimes, as educators, you have to show something path-breaking just to bring or promote the desired changes around us. In fact, we have received a very interesting question from a participant that cinemas do help in de-learning, the anti-social activities. Now, in this situation, professors, I'm looking at Professor Seshadri essentially because he's going to give the answer first, and then Professor Raghunath will get the chance. So in this situation, a teacher or an educator can't really make the choice alone, Professor. I'm not saying whether they should or they should not. Now I'll cut the whole thing short. What steps or process could be in place for selecting and including maybe the right kind of, the appropriate kind of films in the larger institutional programs, courses, etc., so that the shown films are largely and widely accepted as part of a curriculum, just like the way set of readings, study materials, journals, etc., are accepted by the learners and also by the peer educators. What is your take on that?
Lopa, Professor Krishna Kumar, earlier of NCERT, wrote a book called On What is Worth Teaching. In that, there is a chapter called On Growing Up Male. And Professor Krishna Kumar said classrooms must act as counter-socializers. If civil society and films depict men and women in certain ways, and Teresa, one of the participants, has spoken about depiction of women, and I have been quite active in responding on chat as well to many of the comments that have been put. While you may select, curate films to watch, the truth is that there will be an equal, if not 50 times the number of films and images that project stereotypes. The idea is you can curate, you can select, but you also need to look at what mainstream stereotypes are like and make the classroom come alive to question that stereotype and question where it comes from, so that you break the pernicious triangulation, for example, of heterosexism, homophobia, and patriarchy, or of misogyny, gynophobia, and patriarchy, to build a classroom. And Vygotsky says this also, in addition to the zone of proximal learning. He says classrooms must be collaborative communities where knowledge is jointly constructed. So to really break stereotypes and to question, so classroom really become places where you question existing stereotypes. and then allow these debates, discussions, argumentation to refine an idea, to refine and construct new truths, and then allow your students then to go out to practice them in their homes and in public spaces, and then come back. So iteration is important. So questioning, iteration, selecting other movies that show the same thing. That so basically, संक्षिप्त में कहा जाए, लोग गलती ये करते हैं, आगरा जब जाते हैं तो सुबह जाते हैं, शाम को आ जाते हैं. You can't do justice to Agra. You have to go there for a week so that when you come back, you say Taj Mahal को दूर से देखा, पास से देखा, आगे से देखा, पीछे से देखा, बाहर से देखा, अंदर से देखा, धूप में देखा, बारिश में देखा, जब संगमरमर का रंग बदलता है, दिन में देखा, और चांदनी रात में, वो भी पूर्णिमा के रात में, जो 500 रुपए का टिकट मिलता है. And this is the beauty of children. For a child, even a discarded toffee wrapper is a plaything because it has texture, and it makes sound, and it takes flight when you throw it in. And this natural philosopher that a child is, because of the gift of curiosity and wonder, sometimes is destroyed by 3 processes. They are called education, parenting, and growing up. So to rediscover the philosophy in your student, and as Tahiya Afzal puts on chat, emotional intelligence, to connect to that. Over to Professor Raghunath.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Shishadri. Yes, Professor.
Right. So, in a sense, I would just say that what we are primarily doing is, if you ever use cinema as part of the pedagogy, it is about triggering divergent processes of approaching learning. So rationality has its hues, right? How do we make sense about a certain phenomenon? It's a medium which actually brings that out into the open. So as a pedagogical tool, it's very rich, and one must have the comfort of the discomfort of this divergence which comes. You understand this? You must not feel uncomfortable saying, oh my God, look at these fellows, they are at each other. That's very good, because finally they have to come up with certain decision rules which everybody accepts. And that is core learning, right? That is core learning. And that's what you're driving at. That you're saying, boss, these are the tools, these are the frameworks, these are the limitations of whatever it is. And all of that should come out. And you drive that thing. So it requires a tremendous, I would say, a tremendous allegiance and loyalty to transformative communication that encourages each one who's there in that class or on that group to explore their own cognitive abilities, their own perceptions, and even check out their own social values. It happens because management is not independent of society, right? It is very much there. So the ability to, it only comes, if people ask, how do you cycle? Boss, first somebody has to push you on those 2 wheels. You have to feel the exhilaration of going on 2 wheels, and then the fear of falling. And you will fall, but after you fall, you'll always get up and then try again and you'll succeed. So to achieve a balance between the imageries which come, the interpretations which come, and you push everybody to say, boss, now what's the conclusion? For example, I don't know whether you've seen this movie, The Big Short, right? Adam McKay's Big Short. And it includes analysis of the market, the ability to see the future, whether the economy is doing well or not, using a data-driven approach,
trying to stick to your ideas in spite of everybody else saying something else. The ethics of trying to profit through betting on people who are actually losing, and the kind of professionalism in the way you interact with investors and employees, and you ask these guys, boss, what do you think? And that brings the core of learning of whatever readings you gave them in theory, or whatever you wanted to drive at. So what I'm trying to say is that it is a very rich dimension. And I'm sorry to belabor the point. It requires a whole lot of time before you even try and put it out into the class. Okay. Yeah. But after you do it, I guarantee you that the satisfaction that you have of driving understanding, of people really feeling enriched in terms of their own depth and breadth, is you cannot put a money value to it or a very objective measure. That's not.
Thank you so much. You both have actually taken us to another world, and it is the world of cinema. Time is the biggest constraint, so we can't take any more question. If you have to give any concluding remark, what would that be?
Well, from my side, the remark is picture abhi baki hai, mere dost. I'm sure Professor Chetan Subramaniam will agree that this is just the start of something that promises to be vibrant, considering that at least on Zoom, we started with 120 people, 108 are still on. By and large, there is an attrition of about 20 to 30%, perhaps even 50% in most programs. This is the kind of draw that films have, Sholay picture 100 baar dekhi hai maine, kind of draw. So I'm sure, Lopamudra Diwan, that you will be in discussion with Professor Chetan Subramaniam to see if you could consider converting this into an ongoing forum, and perhaps we could even think, even if it is once a month or once in 1.5 months, we alternate between discussions and film watching. I could assist you in curating this to look at management themes, to look at leadership themes. We could do it thematically. So this is something that I would be delighted to partner with.
I would say the same thing to Professor Chetan Subramaniam. I mean, this is something that is worth doing, and if at all he thinks this is an area where we should actually build a repository or make suggestions, I'm very much in it, as Professor Sheshadri said. Thank you very much.
Chetan, new CTL initiative in the pipeline. I will be submitting the proposal soon, sir. All right. Thank you so much. Professor Chetan, anything you would like to add?
No, I would like to thank the panelists, Dr. Seshadri and Professor Raghunath. I mean, absolutely riveting, as Dr. Seshadri noted. We are all still glued to our seats. Absolutely fascinating conversation, lots of food for thought in terms of things that we could incorporate into our classrooms. And I think an excellent suggestion about having an ongoing discussion on this topic. And we certainly will, take that up. And I'll certainly take you up on your offer, Dr. Seshadri and Professor Raghunath, on curating those films, and applying it to management education. So thanks a lot. And thanks a lot to the audience. And of course, above all, Lopa, for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we will be back soon with another enriching discussion. Stay tuned and stay safe. Thank you.